On Thursday, the 3rd of September, I had an email from Waterstones booksellers, and the top of the email said Super Thursday. And the reason they called it Super Thursday was because on that particular day, 590 brand new hardback books were published on one day. And the reason for that, of course, was that some of the books that should have been published earlier in the year had been not published because bookshops were closed due to the COVID-19 situation. And I was reading an article about Super Thursday, and in the article a lady called Caroline Anderson from the Bookseller magazine was quoted, and she said this: "It's such a tough job getting any oxygen for books. It does seem kind of crazy." And that email from Waterstones reminded me that earlier in the year, in June in fact, I received a WhatsApp message and photograph from my brother-in-law Pete, and I want to show you the photograph now. Here it is. It's, as you can see, a picture of some piles of books that he's been reading, and they're stacked up in his bedroom. And earlier this week he actually said that the pile of books that he'd been reading was 3 times higher. And I wanted to ask you, with all this talk of books, what have you been reading during this period? And I think it's only fair, if I ask a question like that, that I show you some of the material that I've been reading. And I'm really a mood reader, and depending what mood I'm in will influence the book I read. So just for example, if it's in the evening and I just want to relax, I might pick up a book like this one. It's a sports book, Ben Stokes, or I might pick up a thriller like this one by David Baldacci. But if I'm feeling a little bit more energised and I can concentrate better, I might pick up a book like this one, Suffering and the Love of God, the Book of Job, or a book you might recognise from a previous message. I might read an extract or a chapter from this type of book. This one's You're Not Listening. Now, the fattest book I've been reading, fattest by way of number of pages, is this one here, and it's actually the memoir of a former Prime Minister, David Cameron. And it's 703 pages, and his last chapter is called The End, and quite honestly that's exactly where I wish I was. Now, the thinnest book I've been reading is this one here. You can just see how small and how thin it is, and the title of this book is Those Were the Games, Tottenham Hotspur, a Century of the Greatest Games. There's 2 games, 8 pages, 6 photos, 4 paragraphs of writing, and at $7.99, an absolute rip-off. The newest book I've been reading is this one here, called A Double Life by Charlotte Filby, and that too is a thriller. But the oldest book I've been reading is this one here, called The Holy Bible. Now, very occasionally I will give up on a book, and this is one example called The Topicus School by Ben Lerner, and I don't know what it is about this book, I just couldn't get into it, and I've actually stopped reading it halfway through. Of all those books that I've read, very few will I ever read again, even in part, but this book I've read through 7 times, and I'm actually reading it for the 8th time. Why do I keep reading the oldest book? Well, it's in this book that I find out who God really is, not who I want him to be. Here I discover when he acts, when he changes his mind, when he gets angry, what pleases him. It's the oldest book, but it's so modern. It's so relevant to our times, in our generation. To get to know God, he gave us a book. And it's in this book that he speaks clearly. He doesn't mumble. He said exactly what he wanted to say. Doesn't carry a best before or a use by date. And Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Why not? Because his words will always be relevant, always truthful. Very important that we know what Jesus said, what he did, what he challenged, what he walked away from, what he confronted head on. Helen and I were recently watching a preacher on YouTube, and during the person's message, the preacher said something that Jesus did. And when he said what he thought he did, we looked at one another and we said that's exactly what he didn't do. So it's very important we know what Jesus really did. So, in this period, whether you're reading a fat book, a thin book, a new book, let me encourage you to find some time to keep going with the oldest book. Don't give up on it. Let this be a book that still gets oxygen in your home between its pages.